Hello everybody, my name is Doug Cleaver. I'm Director of the Doctoral School at Sheffield Hallam University and also a trustee of and Executive Committee member of the UK Council for Graduate Education, or UKCGE. And I'm here today with Helen Gleeson from Leeds University, Professor Helen Gleeson, Head of Physics at Leeds. And we're going to be discussing the Times Higher Education Outstanding Supervisor of the Year award, which Helen won last December.
Yeah.
A little bit of explanation as to where we are and what we're doing here. We are recreating a video which we shot in April in Leeds. Unfortunately, the recording of that failed to record, so we're having another go at it. The next place that Helen and I happened to be in the same place as each other, we're sitting in New England in Colby Sawyer College, where Helen and I both happen to be attending the Liquid Crystal Gordon conference, which is good fun, and we're giving up our free afternoon to put this together for you. So that's where we are. So Helen won this award, given this award last December, having been nominated by a number of her research students earlier in the year. We're going to kick off. I'll ask Helen to give a summary of your wonderful career to date.
Well, thanks. I'll keep it brief because otherwise it gets a little bit boring. So, I did a degree in maths and physics. I chose to go to Manchester University after going to a very ordinary comprehensive school in West Yorkshire. Maths and physics was an unusual choice for a woman in those days, and I just want to pay tribute, I think, to the approach my parents took, and I think that actually stayed with me throughout. They always had a very inclusive approach to just helping people to do what they could do, and so I think that's relevant. So I did my degree, then stayed at Manchester for 34 years. Man and boy, as they say.
Okay.
So I did my degree there. I did a PhD. I went on and got a lectureship in 1989. Had a fairly standard academic career until I got to the point where I was the Dean for Research, and that happened at the point where the two universities in Manchester merged. So that was very interesting. Had responsibility for research aspects of the faculty then. Was head of school, head of department for a couple of years. Then decided I was missing teaching and research too much, so I went back to being an ordinary academic and moved to Leeds 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, again to take on being head of department. So and you know, it's not that I particularly seek roles like that. But it was a really good opportunity to move, and the two things went together, and actually it's been fine, it's been good.
Okay, you've missed out something rather important. You were awarded an OBE along the way there somewhere.
Yes, that's right. So I guess one of the things that I had little choice over was to really be a bit of an advocate for women in science. I was the first female lecturer that was appointed at Manchester, which is a dreadful thing actually, rather than an achievement on my part, is the way I view it. And you know, whether I wanted to or not, people wanted me to be a role model, to actually do things, and it was a big responsibility. And in the end, you know, I embraced it and did what I could to encourage women into science and technology and engineering careers, and that was a big driver in that.
So as you say, you're head of department in Leeds now. Moved there a few years ago, so it gives you an opportunity, big opportunity, to set the research culture in that department and in that university. So what's your approach there?
Yeah, it does. I think the universities are very interesting places, and they've changed a lot over the years, but they can actually still be quite difficult environments for a wide variety of people and for a wide variety of reasons. So although there's a very open culture, it can also be very competitive. It's a very diverse workforce, so the students, the staff, diverse in age, diverse in background, culture, ethnicity, and so on. And so one of the things that I feel very strongly about is that we have a welcoming, friendly and professional environment. And one of the things I was able to do as head of school was act on a suggestion actually from one of my colleagues, that we had a departmental code of practice.
Okay.
And so we drew one up together as a school. We agreed the wording as a school. It applies to everybody.
Yes.
It starts with the words: be welcoming, friendly, professional and kind.
Yes. Start with the positives.
Start with the positives. And I think the advantage of having something like that, it's in everybody's induction pack. We use it at all inductions.
Yeah.
It's actually displayed around the department, including on the back of the toilet doors. And the really important thing about having something like that is that it says up front what we want to be, how we want to behave, and what will and won't be tolerated. And I think that sometimes that just makes people stop and think. And so it really gives us a place to start the whole process from.
Good. Yeah.
Of course, it's supported by university policies.
Yes.
You know,
yes,
let me just say that. That's not. It's not that we didn't need. You know, it's not that we didn't have those.
But linked back to some extent to the principles you said that you got from your parents.
Yeah. And I think, you know, what I have experience of being in a very significant minority throughout my academic career.
Yes.
And, you know, there were good and bad things about that. And I think there are many aspects which are just easily fixed by saying to people, stop and think, be friendly, be inclusive. And, you know, I'm not naive enough to think that everybody is automatically going to change because of that. But it's a really important starting point in making some sort of manifesto for the department about that's what we want to be.
Yeah. So how recent is that?
We actually worked on it from about 18 months ago, and where we launched it a year ago.
Yeah. So a bit early to be getting any feedback from.
It's not actually. I mean, interestingly, you know, one of the important things that's included in the code of practice is a generic email. It's dignity.physics@leeds.ac.uk. And that we wanted in having a code of practice, it's really important that people can report.
Okay.
And that they can report confidentially.
Yes.
And that they know that something will happen. And so I must admit, quite naively, I thought, well, I'm quite approachable. Surely they can come and see me. Yeah. But there's that power imbalance.
Yes.
And actually telling the head of school something is very different from just sending an email saying, actually, this made me uncomfortable. And so that's actually been a big success.
Okay.
So, you know, we have had people use that email.
Yeah.
And it's meant that we've known about things that we would then want to address and want to change.
So it's motivated change, whatever that might be.
Yeah, so I think quite quickly actually it made a difference.
Great. Talk about your supervision there.
Right.
So at the early part of a research student studies, they can be pretty unclear as to what they should, what they shouldn't be doing. How do you set expectations at the early stage?
Yeah, I think this is again something that it depends on every student. So every student's different. I think that's the first thing. Okay. Some students come in with very clear idea of what they would like their project to be, and then the setting of expectations is around helping them to understand that the first part is really going to be probably going to be quite carefully guided around them learning skills and learning techniques, and bringing knowledge together, and then travelling down a more independent path where they begin to set the agenda.
Yes.
Some people come in having an idea that they fancy doing the project that you've defined. Okay, and of course doing research is very different from thinking that you might do it. Yeah. And so for them there's a lot more direction in terms of how those project milestones might
making it tangible.
Yeah, I mean in both cases I think you have to do that. It's just the amount by which you would do it in each case differs. And some students are really not very confident, and so you know, especially at the beginning, I think building up that confidence is important. But so that's, you know, that's kind of supportive stuff. But I think the other thing that is really important is that I explain that it's a full-time job. Yeah. That I expect them to be professional. That
there's the code of practice.
There's the code of practice, but that, you know, it is they treat it like a job, that they won't have the holidays that they had when they were undergraduates. That I'll behave in a certain way in terms of my expectations of them, and similarly they have to give me time to help them, and so I think that first communication is really important. Setting those expectations and how we might begin to work together as a student supervisor pair.
So, but there's the technical aspects of the PhD, and there's the personal support side. Some supervisors are very directive, some are more laissez-faire. What's your approach when you...
I think I probably have a bit of both. So I think that the PhD is the time that you have to explore new ideas, and so my job there is to make sure that it's going in a direction and that enough will be achieved, that a good thesis can be written. It's a little bit different if we've got industrial collaborators in there, and we might need to just be a little bit more focused. But nonetheless, I still think that's what that's meant to be. So I would want to have the PhD with lots of space to explore interesting things. But then you get onto the directive bit, because you can't just do that. You have to complete bits of work. You have to be able to write it up in the end. And so that's I think where
your
really
job is
quite
to monitor if certain tasks are not getting done habitually. Make sure that they are. And what about on the pastoral side?
Oh, right. So, I think again the supervisor-student relationship is probably one of the hardest that you ever have, because it's two individuals, and it's co-supervisors, but nonetheless it's a very, very one-to-one relationship, which is going to happen over 3.5 years typically. I think you can't help but become involved in each other's personal life a little bit. So you're going to socialise at conferences, for example,
and be aware of
network
family situations.
And be aware of family situations. So I would want to be very sympathetic. I hope that they could tell me if they needed special leave for some reason, and I would be supportive of that. I think it's a really important side of the job, but I think we all have to recognise where our limitations stop. So for mental health issues, of course, I would be a supportive supervisor and co-worker, but the professional counselling has to be done elsewhere. I'm not qualified for that. So those boundaries have to be quite important, I think.
And before this, I've been reading some of the nomination statements that have come in from your previous students, dating back a little while.
Yes.
And it's clear that they really, really value both aspects of the relationship that you have had with them, and you suggested that the relationship only lasts for 3.5 years. These have gone on for decades, and they're still...
they have, and I think that's just brilliant.
Some are still working with you?
Some are still working with me. Actually, a couple of weekends ago, I went to the 50th birthday party of my very first PhD student, which was both shocking and wonderful. Right? I think we were both quite shocked that she was 50. But no, I mean, absolutely. If you're lucky, and it goes right, then this is a professional relationship for years. You hear people talking about the research family, and if you're lucky, that's the way it works out. But those networks they help everybody. It's part of how I can help people to make contact to get jobs. It's part of how I can even before whether they get jobs or not, just find out what other jobs are. We've got a wide network of people, and so you talked about the pastoral versus the science supervising the PhD bit. I enjoy helping people to work out what they might want to do next,
because motivations do evolve through the PhD and subsequently,
and how that PhD will help them in what they want to do, and I think that helps to keep the motivation.
Again, you're being modest, because I think that student, you and she, were the first all-female team at the department in Manchester.
That's right. At the department in Manchester, certainly. And I was very lucky, because I was only I was a very young lecturer, and of course in those days there weren't any sort of training schemes for new supervisors, and so we learned on each other. and that actually made a very special relationship. And luckily, she told me when I got it wrong,
Good.
and that was good. That was really important.
Yeah, that honesty is.
Yeah, yeah. I told her when she got it wrong as well,
Okay.
so it was fine.
So some supervisors can be over directive, and some can be under directive. Students don't want to fly the nest. Students become too dependent. What's your approach if you're finding that a student is being too reliant on you, for example?
I think that the main reason that would happen is lack of confidence, right? It's rarely because they're lazy and they just can't be bothered.
Yeah.
So that would be really unusual. And I think you have to. But let's just say first of all, work out what the reason is.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So
some underlying
reason, and it may be that it's a signal that they can't put what they want to or need to into their research because they've got, and a reason for that might be because they've got problems, personal problems or an illness or something. So that can absolutely happen, and then it's about fixing that, and you can fix the rest.
Yeah.
Sorry, I've just noticed the screen going.
Oh yes.
Oh, we're fine.
The screen went blank. It's come back to life.
Right. Sorry about that.
Okay.
So then, as I say, that I think the most common reason is lack of confidence, and so you have to help them to build up confidence. And you do
the autonomy. That's the.
Yeah, and I think some of that is just sharing that I wasn't, I wasn't that confident myself.
Yeah.
So showing that feeling nervous about where they sit in terms of, can I really do this, is a normal reaction. And then encouraging them to tackle that one step at a time.
Yeah.
And I think also celebrating success.
Yeah.
So when they really have achieved something,
Yes.
To really make note of that.
Which kind of brings us on to feedback. So a student comes to you with some written work or some results. What type of feedback would you give? So they will come with something when something's gone wrong. Or
So I absolutely see my students at least once a week for an hour each individually.
And I think timetabled
that's timetabled in. Yeah. It's non-negotiable. They're expected to be there. I'm expected to be there.
Yeah.
And so that's the first step in making sure that that we can actually do that feedback process.
Yes.
So I asked them to tell me what they've been doing, show me
those
their
meetings
results.
structured? Will there be a bullet point list that you've agreed?
No. Actually, no. I ask them to make the best use of that time that they want to. Okay. And so in the really early stages, of course, you're sort of structuring them, under the horizon, and sort of saying, well, perhaps in the next week you do X, Y, or Z, and tell me how you've got on and what sort of results you got, and then we'll check you're comfortable with that, and of course it develops from there. But no, I want them to come and be enthusiastic about what they've got, show me what they've got, and then we'll sort of talk it through, and I'll often want them to explain it to me, because they're becoming the experts in it.
Okay.
So that sort of feedback, it becomes a normal scientific discussion. Now, when it's written work that they hand in, of course, the first thing I warn them about is that they will be surprised at the amount of red pen. Okay. And I do a lot of it on the computer, but nonetheless, nominal red pen that's on there, and it's a bit of a joke, right? Okay. We have a bit of a joke about it. Yes. And again, it's because, and I think it's about explaining that it's not because, I want to make them feel bad or correct them, but they're going to very soon be writing things that other people are going to critique. Yes. They're going to be publishing papers. They're going to be working for a company, writing reports. Yeah. And it's a really good learning environment. Yeah. So bear with me.
So part of the PhD is learning to write at a different level. Yeah. Whatever their discipline might be.
And a lot of that's around structuring things and so on. And so, I will give a lot of written feedback. Okay. I mean, arguably too much.
what happens if you're getting the same issue
over and over.
Repeated?
So if it's so we're talking about where someone might be doing something wrong or incorrectly or whatever, and they keep on doing it
in the same way.
Well, I mean, I've had that a good example of where that's happened quite often is in the writing of the thesis. I mean, that's a common one.
Yes.
Where what the students would like to do is use me as a proofreader.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's quite hard learning good grammar, and actually a lot of science students have never learned good grammar.
No.
And so I think you have to have a really robust grown-up conversation about the fact that that's not what I'm there to do.
So what is in your remit and what is not?
Yeah, and and that they need to learn how to do that.
Yeah.
And that is their responsibility. On those instances, I usually point out that there's only one name on the thesis, and it's not mine.
Yes.
So it's different from co-authoring things. So it's about encouraging responsibility, I think, in the end.
Yeah.
Now,
you as a lab-based scientist, what about things like health and safety or lab conduct or
yes. So
safety of results?
Yeah, I am actually very strict on that, and I think you have to be. And that's about being professional. Mm-hmm. So it's not quite 3 strikes and you're out, but I would certainly take that approach. So if somebody really, there was no reason, let's take a health and safety issue. We have a rule in our lab where, if anyone thinks anybody else is doing something unsafe, they can stop. Yeah. There's no hierarchy. And then we discuss it. But if someone then did the same thing again, I would want to understand why they thought that might be okay. Yeah. And if they did it a 3rd time, they would be banned from the lab. Okay. For a week, say. Yeah. I've never actually had to do that. So I'm kind of making.
Well, you're on record now, so.
But it's I've said it. Okay. I've never done it. Right. But I think you have to take these things really seriously. Yeah. If it's a health and safety related thing, if it's about someone, another one is actually just putting the work in. And sometimes just people go through a phase where they'd rather not. Yes. And so they might not be coming in very early. They might be going home a bit earlier. Just not putting the amount of effort that they're going to need in. And it is about them realising that it's their PhD, not mine. And my job is to help them succeed. Yes. But their job is, if they want to succeed, it is for them to do that.
Okay. It's around us.
Yes.
We work in an international world. That's rubbish. But academia is international, and we are sitting in the States at the moment. And a number of your students are at this conference. Yeah. How do you support your students to get involved internationally, and get opportunities internationally?
Yeah, I was lucky. I had opportunities when I was a student to go to international conferences, and the networks we all know the benefits, right? Yeah. So I do my best to support them. We all get a little bit of funding through the normal funding routes come with a small amount. Yes. I actually I like them to apply for more from whatever sources they can, and I work with them to do that because that helps their CV and means we can stretch it further. So we've got this win-win situation going on.
As funding applications go, that's a relatively straightforward one.
And they're quite small amounts of money to the people who are going to give them, but they really start to make you stand out from the crowd. So this is about preparing them for the job applications they might do. It's about preparing them again to take that responsibility.
And it can also encourage them to make the most of the opportunity, because they might be required to do a write-up of the meeting or whatever they've been to.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a really good example at the moment where the university has a scheme where they'll give maybe £1,500 for an international visit, and it's meant to be a new collaboration to start new research. And I suggested to one of my students that he might want to start putting an application together, that I'd help him. Did he want to go?
Okay, and that would be a trip on his own.
Yeah, I'm going to go, and he's going to go for 3 weeks. I'm going to go and obviously just
Yeah.
You know, do the fly in, fly out bit.
Yeah.
Make sure. Well, I would like to go for 3 weeks as well, but I can't do that.
But presumably, this is the lab that you will be going to is one that you already
I know the lab.
with.
Yeah, I know the lab. I've never actually formally worked with a person in the lab.
Okay.
So it's a really nice opportunity.
Yeah.
They've already met. Yeah, so you're right. There's got to be a safe environment.
Yes.
You know, you can't just send people off. Although they're adults, you know, it still wouldn't be the right thing to do. No. You've got to make sure that that all of that is a reasonable thing to do.
Yeah.
A couple of my students went to Japan last summer, and when I say a couple, they went together because it was just easier for them both to do it.
Yes.
You know, I think that's
a bit of safety in numbers.
Exactly.
And it's just been a more enjoyable experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sitting on a long flight with nobody to talk to, or in an airport lounge, whatever.
Yeah. Again, they
challenging.
help get the funding for that.
Okay.
So.
And what about your students interacting with peers or with other faculty within the department or elsewhere? Is that something you encourage?
Yeah.
Are there any occasions where a student has gone further than you would have wished them to, divulging results, or
that's a good
undercutting
one.
you?
So I think it's really important that people can, you know, experience and benefit from the knowledge and the background and all the rest of it of all of the people around them. That's why we work in academia.
Yeah.
Some of the students, about half of my students, have been industrially funded, and of course there are confidentiality clauses involved there. And so one of the things I do right at the beginning is have a real discussion with them about what that means. And actually it usually doesn't constrain.
No.
So
the student has to sign an agreement on confidentiality.
But signing and helping them to understand it, I think, is
an IP agreement, not a confidentiality agreement.
Yeah, a non-disclosure agreement, and the IP.
Yeah.
Oh, some of the stuff's confidential.
Yes.
And so, you know, if there really is something confidential, I would talk to them about it, and you know, we would discuss it, and hopefully, they would get it. As I say, I've never then had a situation where that's then been a problem.
No. But for your students to go and seek ideas from other academics, you don't feel threatened by that?
Of course I do. Yeah, of course I do. I would like to be the one that has all of the really good ideas.
Yeah.
But
I'm not going to tell you about the conversation I had with your student last night.
but of course I'm not.
No.
And you know, they're not going to get the best out of it if they only look to one person for ideas.
So generally, that's something to be encouraged.
I think it's to be encouraged, but it does. Yeah, it sometimes is uncomfortable.
Yeah. Publication. Do you like your students to publish early? Do you want to get a big piece of work together before it can see the light of day?
No, right, that a bit of both. Again, a bit of both, and I think it just depends on the situation. I like them to publish.
Yeah.
I think that is absolutely good for them.
Part of the experience.
Part of the experience. It means that when they go into their Viva, they've already had some of their work peer reviewed.
Yeah.
Usually not all of it, but certainly some of it. Whether it's going to be a short, snappy paper because we've got a couple of interesting results, and that would be one mode. But certainly, you know, we've had some results, and then it's been clear that if we go collaborate with maybe a theoretician or someone, it's going to be a better paper.
Yeah.
And so we have that discussion.
Yeah.
And that's then what we would do. I hope we would come to agreement together.
Yeah. But these are very much joint authored works.
Oh, I want them to write the first draft.
Yeah.
It usually needs
They
a bit
write
of work.
first draft, your red ink.
My red ink comes into play.
Yeah.
You know, we then talk about how.
And you have clear roles,
you would
presumably, within the writing process. There's putting the results together and the graphing side of things, and the writing the contextual part of the paper. They probably.
So I even like them to have a go at that. But we would discuss what's going to go in it.
Yeah.
And then at the point where they've had a go at it, they'll give it to me, and I'll add to that. Often the bit.
What about the submission process?
I've changed with time on that. I used to want to be the one that submitted it.
Yeah.
And you know what? Now I'm very happy for them to submit. And I think that comes with, it does come with seniority, to be honest. I mean, we have to recognise that for people who are still early career and looking for promotion, there are indicators that are used in different places about, you know, whether they led that paper. So being the author for correspondence is one of those indicators. And so I think that people have to do what the right thing is there, and normally it wouldn't be the student submitting it. Maybe I've just got lazy as I've got older.
Where are we? Oh yeah, so completion. So in terms of funding for full-time doctorates, it's 3 or 4 years, is it? How do you encourage your students to submit in a timely fashion? How important is that from your perspective?
So I feel really strongly about this. I think that there are too many people who see the PhD as in the funding period as some sort of vague thing that doesn't actually bear any relationship to how long the PhD should take. And for them, you know, they approach it as something where there's an expectation that people will work unpaid for several months, and I just think that's completely unreasonable. So I think that the supervisor has a responsibility to, first of all, make sure the project is doable in that time.
Yes, it's the right size.
I think one of the hardest bits is the bit where the students need to start writing up, which I would normally say would be about 6 months before the end of funding. Won't necessarily take them the 6 months, but to do all of the writing, but that's a good guideline. Of course, at that point they're getting really interesting stuff out usually, and they could just do that one more experiment. And they want to, and sometimes you want them to. And so that's something where I think you just have to keep in mind that, you know, no, they really should be finishing at that point. If they then want to continue working beyond that to just get that extra bit, and they want to do that free of charge,
or do that international visit, or
do that international, then of course they could still choose to do that, and some do, while they're waiting for their viva. But I don't think, unless it's absolutely vital for the thesis, and it rarely is, I think you have to know when enough is enough.
So it can be an artificial end, really, a doctorate. It's beginning of.
It always is.
It's a beginning, not an end, isn't it?
I think it always is. And I think if you're going to ask students to go beyond the funded period, you should be doing it because you're going to fund them to do that, and there's a good reason for that.
Let's turn the screen back on again. Wake up.
And you know, and I did that recently with one of my students. We found something really exciting and interesting. We decided we were going to file a patent. That was this was 6 months before his endpoint. That took quite a lot of work.
And so when the big results come out.
And so I needed to fund him for an extra couple of months. But you know, we talked about whether that was the right thing to do, and we both felt it was. So
it's probably cheaper than defending the patent. Another issue. So some students can think that writing the thesis, that the thesis is just a document saying what they've done. How do you get across what a thesis should be?
So I call that the brain dump. Where you know, absolutely what they think they're going to do is just you know, take everything that they've done and thought about and put it on paper. And there's a number of things right there, of course, the structure and so on. And I think you have to sit down with the student and explain what it means to write a thesis. And a lot of universities have, you know, how to write a thesis courses as well, which will help them. But to me, it's about helping the student to realise that they're going to take the reader by the hand and tell them a story. And that story has to have a beginning, a middle and an end, and it should flow. And so just bearing that in mind throughout, so you can do that at a very top level to start with, and then just make sure that works through. And there are tricks that I'm sure we all know about, finishing one chapter saying, this chapter said such and such,
yeah.
and this will now go on and be used
Yes.
in the next chapter,
Yes.
and helping that flow.
A thesis generally is not a whodunit. It
No.
should be pretty clear from the first page what the last page is going to say.
But I have to say, occasionally you do get the chapter that's been written like a whodunit.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
and of course it's the student's thesis.
Yes.
So I think it's your job to, if that's really bizarre and odd,
Yes.
I think it's important that you can say that and explain why.
Yes.
But in the end, it's the student's piece of work.
Yeah.
And there's only one name on the spine, right? So they will make the final decision.
Yeah. And submission and all of that is totally for them.
Yeah.
One of my favourite questions opening questions in a Viva is say, "It's your thesis. We read this. It's wonderful. Whatever." Then ask what order the work was done, as opposed to how was it been presented.
Oh, that's a good question.
And that it's a slightly unusual icebreaker, but it's a very good way of making sure that the student's done the work, and it's something that's they're very, very, very happy to talk about because it's about their life. So.
And I think the other thing is that, of course, they often want the bit that took them longest to occupy the biggest part of the thesis.
Yes.
And actually talking through how that's often not the right thing to do.
Yeah.
Because no one really needs that blow-by-blow account of how you eventually got that bit to work.
Yeah.
Although they might want a summary of it.
Yeah.
And that's very useful.
How the aims of the work might have shifted as things went on.
Yeah.
We hinted a little bit before about careers, future careers. So a number of your students I know have gone into academia. How do you support students that are interested in maintaining that?
I think to be honest with you, I think in exactly the same way as you would support a student who wants to go into industry.
That's my next question.
Right.
Yeah.
Employers are looking for success.
Yeah.
And this is where encouraging them to apply for small grants for travel, giving them that international experience so that they've actually worked with other people, so they've got referees who are not just in their home institution.
Yes.
Then the papers, of course, they're tangible, internationally reviewed pieces of work. So that's already starting their publication record. So they would be the obvious things to do, but success in anything that would be as relevant for someone who wanted an industrial job. But then I think on top of that, just helping them to understand what the pathway might look like.
Yes. So being realistic.
Yeah, and where what the opportunities might be.
Yeah.
So whether they will almost certainly take a postdoc somewhere else, or in the same group. But they'll take a postdoc. They won't normally have their own fellowship, but just helping them to see that sort of progression is one that's a good pathway.
Do you ever invite exemplars, former students, back to the department, come and have a chat?
Yeah, but actually more often I've done that where they followed industrial roles. But certainly, the students would meet some of my former students at conferences, which is very nice.
Yes.
And so they can certainly benefit there. But I think that the non-standard, well, actually it is the more standard pathway. Actually, if we come down to it, the non-academic pathway, which 80% of the students will follow, is one where they struggle to know what kind of things their PhD would let them do. And so I've organised quite a few careers things where I've invited some of my past students back. It's nice because I get the chance to see them.
Yes, and as a head of a department, you've appointed quite a lot of academics.
Yeah.
So being able to bring that experience to bear.
Yeah, and I think that's not just for my students. So I did a session recently about just applying for academic jobs and how the CV you'd use for your postdoc is different from the CV that you'd use for a fellowship.
Yeah.
If you're being interviewed, what kind of questions you'd be asked, but actually what that question's probing, because that's something that I think isn't always obvious.
Yes.
And we had a quite a broad discussion around that. So I think you can do things like that really help people as well.
Yeah. And sometimes, emphasising the broad skills So that's what can happen with bringing back some former students and say, what aspects of my PhD am I using now?
Definitely.
And it's communication, writing,
definitely. Problem solving.
Yes, because that's what a doctorate in our disciplines means.
Yeah.
Very good. We have come to the end of our list of questions. So thank you for your time. Thank you for sitting in the shade for 40 odd minutes. I think we've been going. So we'll draw a line here. Just to repeat, this is Professor Helen Gleeson, Leeds University, 2018 winner of Outstanding Research Supervisor of the Year. In December there'll be a 2019 winner. I think nominations for that have already closed, so I won't emphasise that. I will just flag one other thing though, which is that the UKCGE has been piloting a scheme for recognition of effective supervision. So we have one national winner, but actually recognising supervisory ability is something the UKCGE is actively looking to promote. We've run a first pilot scheme of that, which is being evaluated as we speak, so look out for that, as well as considering nominating yourself or a colleague for the Outstanding Supervisor of the Year. Thank you, Helen.
Thanks, Doug.